Please be seated, everyone. Hello to you all again, and good morning to you all again. We have a challenging set of words from Jesus today, I think. They are words that I associate with Thanksgiving, like the holiday Thanksgiving, primarily because it finally gives us a reason to understand why there is conflict sometime between our in-laws and us. But here we have it just landing somewhere in the middle of August. I love my in-laws, by the way. They're probably going to watch this YouTube video one day. Tony, Nancy, y'all are beautiful people. It's a wonderful but challenging set of gospel texts today. And I recognize as I approach the text this week, something in me that I have seen happen a lot in our congregation and in our society lately. And I want to talk about that as an entry point into the text. Last week, I preached downstairs in the traditional services, and I shared a little bit down there about just this emotional thing going on with me related to my sense of fear in the world that we live in right now, and how, as much as I would like rationally to believe that that's not there, it's in here. And as you can imagine, other people were like, yeah, me too. And then afterwards, what ends up happening is people were shaking my hand at the door saying, well, you're not supposed to be afraid. And so let me help you with your emotions and try to fix you real quick, which, hey, whatever, thanks for the help. So that's one thing, like the discomfort that I think sometimes we have with hearing other people talk about their emotions or their passion or their desire, right? Later on last Sunday, we were in this thing that we call the forum. It takes place right before the service in the same place. And it's just a community talk-back moment where we get to share with each other. And on the good days, what ends up happening is we share with each other from a deep place of vulnerability. And we say, hey, my name's Remington, and this is kind of how I'm feeling about this thing, and share something of that. The danger, of course, is how will that be held in a room with 80 other people? And last Sunday, similarly, somebody said, well, this is how I'm feeling about the world that I'm in. And she, in the expression of her vulnerability, also began to cry. So the forum ends, and people came up and said, oh, dear sweet woman, you're not supposed to cry in public. Let me fix your thing. Let me try to, oh, you clearly are coming apart at the seams. How can I possibly help you? And just, first of all, right? Like, it's an expression of human emotions, all she was doing. And she was doing it in a way that prompted us, I think, to find the thing within us that resonated, that we all might be drawn to a new position or perspective. That is also what Jesus is doing here, and our tendency is, as it is with those other places, to say, yikes, that makes me a little uncomfortable. Oh my goodness, I wish Jesus would just tone it down a little bit, be a little bit more polite, wouldn't say so much stuff about fire, easy on the fire, Jesus, and just try to temper the language in such a way that it no longer makes us uncomfortable, which is precisely what he was trying to get us to avoid. He was intentionally, usually anyway, trying to make us uncomfortable in a way, bless you, in a way that would have us resonate with those things that come from the deep places in his life. And the deep places in Jesus' life, by the way, are the deep places in God's life. We call those kingdom places, right? So find the things within us that resonate with the kingdom. Okay, all that is somewhat precursor to understanding what Jesus said. And I want to say it because I just want to name, like, there are things about this that might make you uncomfortable. Don't run away from them, just like don't run away from any of the other things that make you uncomfortable. And certainly don't run away from Jesus' passion and desire. And that's how he starts us off. I came to bring fire into this world, and how I wish it were already kindled, he says. Well, quickly, tone it down, right? But before we even get into that, we have to understand, I think, two things. One is that fire is not always a symbol for destruction, necessarily anyway, in the gospel. It's a really important thing to know. So everywhere else in the Gospel of Luke, for instance, where Jesus is named fire, he's named it as a purgative thing, something that purifies, like the way that you would take iron ore and melt it down to remove the impurities. That's the type of fire that Jesus talks about. And actually, the word pure comes from the Greek word for fire. That's what he's talking about. And the other thing you need to know is he's not saying that to everyone. So this is not a judgmental sermon from the Mount. I can't wait to burn this place down. Oh my God, you guys make me sick. He's not doing that at all. Not at all. So to get the context a little bit, I want to back you up ever so slightly. And I'll try to do this relatively briefly, like I'm so good at that. So if you've been here a lot lately, you know that we've been reading from Luke a whole lot lately. We've been doing it for a couple months, and we started off capturing this scene in chapter 9 of Luke. Today's stuff came from chapter 12. In chapter 9, Jesus is on the top of a mountain. He hears the voice of God say, "You're my son, my beloved one." He is sent down from the mountain, and he sets his face to go to Jerusalem, and he knows that he's going to go there and meet resistance and be crucified, handed over to the Roman authorities to be killed on trumped-up charges. He knows that this is going to start to happen and unfold, and he just goes. He says, "This is where I'm going. If you want to come with me, come along with me." And the disciples come along with him, as they do, right? Not quite understanding, and sometimes even resisting. So all on the way, Jesus is teaching and he's healing, and over and over again, he says, "This is the time we are living in. This is what's happening. This is what's really happening right now. And this is what God is doing," right? As they go along, there are these multivalent scenes where Jesus will be interacting with a whole crowd of people, but he'll take his disciples to the side. And when you hear disciples here, just go ahead and do me the favor of also hearing church. He'll take his followers, his believers aside and say, "Hey, here's the thing that you might not know about what's really happening here that they can't understand yet." So he's been doing that. And all of a sudden, Peter, who loves to put his foot in his mouth and get a little bit ahead of himself from time to time, Peter catches on that some of the things that Jesus is saying to the disciples or to his, again, sort of church, he's saying loudly enough that other people can hear it, but it doesn't seem to be for them. And he asks the question that everybody else is probably thinking, "Jesus, is this for just for us? Or is this kind of for everybody? Bless you. Is this for us, humanity? Or is this for us, your people?" That's the question that precedes what Jesus says about fire. How I wish that the thing that separates the pure and the holy from the regular or the unholy, how I wish that were already kindled. That's what I came to do. I came to create some separation between those holy things and those unholy things. And when you hear that, again, it's not a fire and brimstone thing. He's not saying, "I wish I could just come and send everybody to hell that I don't like," but instead that everybody within them and our society as a whole has things that I wish I could just go ahead and separate so that you, Peter, could know the things that are about God and the kingdom that you should be holding, and the things that are just general for everybody. Because not everybody is holding on to this stuff the same way. I wish you, Peter, could have the experience of having the things within you that need to be purified, removed, so that you could just hold on to the stuff of the kingdom of God. But it doesn't work that way, Jesus says. And I know it doesn't. The call to follow, the call to be a part of this, means that some people are going to be divided from one another. The living out your life in love means that some people are going to be divided from one another. And again, that's what I came to do. Separate, eventually, the wheat from the weeds, the sheep from the goats, the pure things from the impure things. That's what we're here for. And to name the things that are of the kingdom, the things that are of love, and the things that aren't. So, as it so happens, some of you who are following me will find out that others in your family can't abide by that. And you'll end up with fathers against sons, and sons against fathers, and daughters against mothers, and mothers against daughters, and in-laws and in-laws and in-laws. It's an impartial list. He doesn't go all the way down the list, but he's exclaiming exactly what the first Christians and the disciples themselves already knew by experience. Jesus, I started following you, and my family didn't come along. Jesus himself experienced that, actually, if you recall. His mom one time showed up and thought maybe he was going out of his mind. And he ended up saying, "Everybody who does the will of my Father, that's my family," right in front of his very own mother. He didn't bring her peace that day, I promise. There was division there. Not permanent division, but division. Because the claim that Jesus' kingdom and love makes on our lives is not something everyone can tolerate. Is there anything in that that resonates with your heart, uncomfortable though it might be? Do you find yourself living more frequently in a world where even within yourself, you feel like you have to choose somehow between getting along with everybody and embodying the love that Christ is calling you to? It's in me all the time, and increasingly so in the life of a church. I say, oh, so clearly, Jesus is saying, walk in love in this particular way. And I'm like, I don't want to walk on that thing because, man, we're not going to be able to get along, all of us. We're going to disagree. There's going to be some division here. And as if in answer to my prayers that I really was not asking for, Jesus lands us and says, yeah, but I didn't come to bring false unity. I didn't come to bring a pat on the back. I came so that you could know the difference between real life and that substitute thing you've been chasing after. I came so that you could know the things of the kingdom and know the things that aren't of the kingdom, and to have a way of letting those things be separated from each other. And though I am uncomfortable with that, my heart resonates and says, church, we got to listen and respond. Remington, I got to listen and respond. We got to know, or at least try to know more. For far too long, I think that this church has prided itself on unity, which usually has meant for us not talking about things, right? Many of you will know that in the early 2000s in the Episcopal Church, which is, we sometimes call it the Intergalactic Episcopal Church, it's not just a national church, it also has branches in other countries. There was the election of a gay bishop. His name was Gene Robinson. He was in New Hampshire. And afterwards, the churches that make up the Episcopal Church started to split apart, and it was so ugly. In the Diocese of Florida, I remember hearing the story of somebody throwing a shoe, a priest throwing a shoe at another priest. In the Diocese of Georgia, where I was at the time, I remember how some clergy began to call out other clergy about their divorces and their adultery and all this other sort of stuff in conventions, and start saying, I wish the fire were already kindled that would burn you alive, right? It was awful. And one of the responses, I think, as a coping mechanism to this is we said, well, gosh, we're not so unified on the issue of human sexuality. Let's stop talking about that. And we'll be together. We'll just be together. I'm not sure that that impulse was wrong. I'm not suggesting that at all. But what was wrong was that we stopped talking about it. And the same is true for a million other topics. The same is probably an impulse that you have from time to time in your own family when the urge comes along that says, I think this is the love that God is calling me to embody in the world, and then you realize, like, but somebody else in my family disagrees with this topic or that topic or whatever, or God forbid this becomes political, right? And so I'd rather be quiet and not talk about it. And Jesus came to bring a fire to burn that protective impulse away from us and say, we got to talk about it. We got to talk about it. We got to talk. Not everybody's going to be happy. Not everybody's going to agree with each other. But we have to allow for God to do God's work. And for the disciples, that meant not hiding from it. I think the same is true for us. As Jesus approached this, he would tell his disciples that it was going to cost him his life, just like it might cost them their families, or cost them their jobs, or cost them something. It was going to cost everyone something. And sure enough, Jesus would go and be met with trumped up charges, handed over to the empire, crucified. All but one of his 12 disciples would lose their lives in the course of the coming years. For all of them, they knew that there would be a sacrifice. Part of walking in love, as Christ loved us, is also giving our lives over as an offering and a sacrifice. We'll take that It'll take that. And it'll take a willingness to get there. All right, I'm talking too much, but I want to share one last thing with you. We'll do it without the audio this time. I bet most of you know the song, The Times They Are A-Changin' from Bob Dylan. Yeah? Yes? No? Maybe? Mostly yeses? Good. Even young people are saying yes. Good. Good. That song was written in 1963. And I want to talk a little bit about that just briefly in terms of the gospel lesson today where Jesus said, you hypocrites, you don't... This is when he turns to the crowd, by the way. All the other stuff was just for the followers of Jesus. Then he turns to everybody else and says, how do you not know how to read this moment? This is the moment. How are you missing it? You know that when the south wind blows up out of the desert, it's going to get hot. Like, way to go, folks, right? How do you not know what's happening right here and right now with all this Jesus stuff? Or for us, how, church, do you not know what's really happening in the world right now? I don't think he's saying be better at understanding. I think he's trying to say here's a pattern that you know, just like you know that when the wind blows off the desert, it's going to be hot. The prophets who came before him, Jeremiah, one of the ones that we just heard, talked about this as well. They stood in a long procession of folks who voiced what God was giving them as a dream and paid the price for it. And Jesus would do the same. And there have been many, many countless others afterwards. The time has always been that time. From time to time, it just peaks in moments of violence, but there will always be resistance to the voice of love in our lives. There will always be resistance to you when you vocalize love in your life. I wish it were not so, but it is so. So I bring up that Bob Dylan song because he wrote it in 1963. It's kind of a tumultuous time in U.S. history, the 60s. A lot of y'all know that because you lived through it, right? My dad was born in 1951. He tells me his early teenage years about some that he went through. He was in Selma, Alabama, of all places, too, right? Civil rights movement, the beginnings of the Vietnam War that would spill out into tremendous bloodshed, countercultural protests left and right. So in the 80s, Bob Dylan was asked, well, surely you wrote that in response to a lot of the things that was happening. This is a Rolling Stone interview, if I remember correctly. Like, yeah, you wrote that after Kennedy was assassinated, probably, and you were saying, well, yeah, the times are changing. Of course they are. And he said, no, I actually wrote that in October. Kennedy was assassinated in November. The next year and the years after that would be tremendously challenging also. And he said, all I was doing was responding to what I saw in the hearts of people that didn't know how to say anything about this stuff. But I could tell what they were trying to hope for and dream about, this new age that might be born out of this moment. So I gave voice to it. And if you go back and listen to the song, everything is incredibly vague in the song. What is he even talking about? He didn't even know. But the times are always changing. There's always a voice in us that calls out for things to be different, for things to be just and right and filled with love and compassion. It was no different for Jeremiah than it is for Martin Luther King Jr., than it is for Bob Dylan in his songs, than it is for us, than it was for Jesus. Jesus ushered in something entirely different than all the rest of those, but invites us to say the same exact thing. Where does the voice of God's love resonate in your heart? Don't push it away. Let it resonate in your life, that your whole body and soul and mind and spirit might vibrate alongside it and make it louder in this world. You will be met with resistance, and when you are met with resistance, know that it's exactly what I promised you, and that you're probably on the right track. Don't shrink from it, step toward it. As a church, I believe that we are so called to listen to Jesus' voice, shake us and rattle us, vibrate us, and cause us to resonate back with the voice of love, that we might go into this world and proclaim that same love. And it's going to cost us something. It just might be a spirit of false unity. It's going to cost us some things about how we measure success. It might change our identity. And it'll be exactly where Jesus has asked us to be. The fire has always been kindled and burns brightly in our midst. May those things within us that might be obstacles to the proclaiming of the gospel of Christ be removed. We might follow the voice of love where it leads and give voice to the love that God has placed in our hearts. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.